Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dr. Robert Baskerville. I am the Executive Director of Rise Up. It's a pleasure to have all of you join with us today, this beautiful afternoon, for our second annual Puerto Rican Heritage Month celebration. Oh, sorry about that. Our second annual Puerto Rican Month Heritage celebration. Rise Up is a grassroots think tank, the acronym for which stands for Research Initiatives for the Strategic Empowerment of Urban Populace. As we're going to see today, part of the strategic knowledge that we attempt to share with our broader community, working in partnership with wonderful partners like Damaris and so many other activists and organizers, is critical knowledge about our past. There's no way that we're going to solve the problems that confront us in the days ahead unless we have a clear understanding of the forces that led us to this point today. Now, another focus of Rise Up is to equip us with the strategic information knowledge that we must have to formulate policy strategies to confront those problems and to come up with viable solutions. I am especially honored and pleased to have members of the Puerto Rican community here with us today, because you have been one of the missing vital elements in a recent project that Rise Up has been central in spearheading. Everyone should know, I see we have some of our seasoned environmental organizers in the community, including my good friend Marvin Church from Environmental Leaders of Color. Many of us who are in the environmental space are aware of the immense amount of funding that the federal government is making available to communities across the United States, including communities of color. Under the Biden administration's recently adopted Climate 40 Justice Initiative, all of the monies that are dispersed by the federal government, substantial amounts, 40% of those monies, need to be targeted to communities of color, to go into the pockets of organizers, business people, those who must play a vital contribution. And as a matter of fact, everyone, my sense is that these grant applications are designed not to succeed unless you and I are at the table. And I want you to know that organizers, activists who have devoted a lifetime to trying to address these problems are looking for you. We're extending an invitation to you. It is very important that we be able to say that we have made a good faith effort to work with one another across the racial, ethnic divides that have so long prevented us from flourishing in this society. And so, anyone who is interested in getting further information about ways that we can partner together on some of these environmental initiatives that are not only designed to provide us with clean energy, but also to be leveraged to create jobs for our communities. I've recently been working with Marvin and helping to prepare some grants. We reviewed unemployment numbers in the city of Yonkers amongst Black and Latinos, and it is stratospheric. The level of unemployment, the numbers above 50%. Everyone, we cannot solve our social problems when more than half of the members of our community are unemployed. And so I will not delay any further. I hope you have heard the passion in my voice, and I urge you to please reach out to me, to Damaris, or anyone else that's affiliated with Rise Up to discuss with us how we can partner together in the future to bring these desperately needed funds to our community. On that note, I will pass the mic over to Damaris Mone. I want to tell everyone that it's been such a pleasure for Damaris and I and the rest of Rise Up, including our good brother Jeff Monroe, to work together to try to provide quality programming to you guys. Damaris, the floor is yours.
Thank you for joining us. Many of you have come actually as far north as White Plains, and we may be even further in Yonkers and Bronx. I truly appreciate that you guys have come here and all the way from Brooklyn as well. She joined us today for the second annual Puerto Rican Heritage Month event. The reason why I selected November 19th is November 19th is technically the day in which, I'm going to use it, Christopher Columbus invaded Puerto Rico, right? We weren't discovered, we were already there. There was already colonial people that were living there. So November 19th, 1498 is when Christopher Columbus first arrived, first invaded. And then the first slave ship arrived in 1502. And so this is the 150th year, 2023 is the 150th year since slavery had been abolished in Puerto Rico. Certainly a lot longer than many other countries had been enslaved. I felt that it was important to bring this knowledge to the community, as well as honoring our ancestors who had been enslaved, as well as to provide some information to our community at large to have a better idea and understanding of the contributions that the Puerto Rican community has done for the United States. And for a lot of you may not be aware, but the Puerto Rican community, Puerto Rican people have fought in every single war that the United States has had, including all the way to the Revolution. And so we've always been there. We've had great contributions. Unfortunately, they've not been acknowledged. So last year was the first time that Kathy Hochul had declared the month of November Puerto Rican Heritage Month. New York City had already declared it back in like 1996 under Giuliani. So I was very grateful that it just happened to be coincidental. I was kind of waiting for somebody else to come along in the city of Mount Vernon that wanted to honor those contributions. I've lived here in the city of Mount Vernon for almost 22 years. And I just realized that, well, looks like it's going to have to be me to come and share my culture and our history with my community, my friends, my family, who may not know necessarily the history of Puerto Rico. So one of the things that I did want to do is I wanted to do a cooking demonstration of traditional Puerto Rican food to show people that you can make a good meal in a single pot and on a hot plate. Because particularly here in the city of Mount Vernon, not everybody necessarily has full cooking abilities. And so I wanted to show that you can cook a good meal on a hot plate. So I did already cook some, so there would be plenty of everybody. There's no way I could have cooked, for 20 people, my little things. And then we're going to have a panel discussion in regards to slavery in Puerto Rico, and we'll have a slideshow. Melinda Gonzalez is with us today, along with, we're going to also have a musical and dance performance by Bomba Grupo Bomba Yo. And a little bit about Melinda. So Melinda Gonzalez is a cultural organizer and a community historian. She is a Brooklyn Puerto Rican whose family hails from Aguadilla, Arecibo, Bayamon, and Rio Piedras, Puerto Rico. Melinda works at the intersections of social justice, arts, and culture and education. Her world was first shaped by Aspira 3A's awareness, analysis, and action. In her 20s, she was mentored by former young Lord Richie Perez, which was honored in last night's event that I attended with Julio Pabon, who organized that wonderful event last night. As a member of Richie Perez, as a member of the National Congress of Puerto Rican Rights, in 2006 she co-founded Bomba Yo as a way of bringing the transformative power of Afro-Puerto Rican Bomba to communities across New York. Melinda is currently the Assistant Director of Dr. Beverly Robinson Community Folk Culture Program at Mind Builders Creative Arts in the Bronx. And so I wanted to bring a collective of like-minded people who love and care about Puerto Rican culture and our history and our ancestry, and wanted to kind of share that with everybody. And so I'm going to get started on a quick cooking demonstration. While this is going to continue cooking, we'll go into the panel discussion, and then afterwards we will have the performance. And then also Julio Pabon will be joining us. And if you happen to have a bio on you, I would love to read it right now, or you can introduce yourself when we get started later. All right, cool. So I'm gonna get started. So what I'm gonna be making today is a traditional, it's called arroz con gandules, or rice and peas. And then I'm also making pollo guisado, or like like chicken stew. And so all in one pot. So as for those who may rank it up, just so that you know, I'm not a professional cook. I'm just a professional mother for 34 years, so I haven't done a lot of cooking in my life. So yeah, you know, but so I don't have like cook, you know, for some people looking at how I use a knife. Don't worry about how Puerto Rican I'm not that myself. However, I may not use it as a traditional cook. But like I said, I can go to school for it. So as in most of our dishes, we use cilantro, peppers, and onions to make. You can either call it recao, sofrito, as well as garlic. Now, for those that are working, and it makes it a lot easier instead of coming in and cutting down your food every night, and you get, you know, to cut down your vegetables so that you can make your own sofrito. You can put it all into a blender, which is what most of our working class Puerto Rican mothers do. However, I have noticed that it is slightly different in flavor than if I actually just, and it's all natural, like I said, and especially I just made it this morning, but when I use the vegetables independently, it provides a different flavor. So, so we're gonna get started, and I wanna say thank you, our mayor, the city of Mount Vernon has arrived, Sean. So, typically, what I like to do is I will, or at least for my is I will cut down my cilantro. Now, if I'm in a rush and I don't have time, then I will use my own homemade sofrito. As I mentioned, it's with pepper, onion, and garlic. But what I like to do is the reason why I like to saute my beans with the vegetables before I add my rice. And then I saute my rice with everything before I add the water. So in the hopes that it will seal in the flavors into the rice. And then the sauteing of the vegetables will bring out more of a flavor. You may be able to notice a difference because since earlier today I was busy, I did use it just the sofrito in that dish over here. So later, when you can try to see if there's a difference in flavor. But my husband, who's the other professional house cook, will say that he prefers it when I use fresh cut vegetables. And I could use the same sofrito from that morning and it'd still be like, I like the other one. I'm also grateful that my son, who's also here, is also a professional family cook. I handed him the baton when he was 17 years old. Figuring my mother got me started at 9. So I said at 17, I was like, listen, at some point or another, you're gonna have to cook for yourself. You might as well learn how to cook good because there's nothing worse than eating terrible tasting food. There was another dish that I was considering making. I was gonna make bacalitos because bacalitos are considered a part of the African diaspora. But I didn't want to use hot oil here, so I figured that would end up being a little bit problematic. Does anybody else here cook for their families? That's nice. Do you make avocados too? It is. Yeah. That's right. The holiday seasons are with us. We're gonna get started. I make arroz graduados maybe once a month. I'm often reminded that I don't like your arroz graduados. But I also make different traditional meals. My husband's family is from Ecuador, so I will also learn how to make traditional Ecuadorian dishes. So what I do is if I don't have time to soak my beans the night before to make sure that I got them ready, you know, I go to my trusty Goya products, right, or Iberia, you know, everybody's got their thing. But I always wash my beans. I always wash my beans, I wash my rice. I make sure that I try to get cleaned in as much as possible. And then I use filtered water at home so that I can cook in filtered water. If I'm gonna do like big pots of sopa, if I'm gonna make a soup or something like that, I try to let the water boil first to boil out. Because we do use a lot of chemicals in our waters to keep it safe and clean, like even like chlorine and fluoride. And so when you do use filtered water, it cleans out those flavors that are in that water, so you're not really contaminating those flavors into your foods. And then I just try to make sure that, like I said, to be as go to scratch as possible. Again, like I said, it can be time consuming, but you can cut corners by using the sofrito so that that's ahead of, you know, that's done. That'll save you at least 20 minutes before you get started. And altogether, when you make arroz con gandules, I say it takes you maybe prep time to done to finish a half hour, maybe 45 minutes again, depending on how much you're actually cooking. And then I like making pollo guisado because like, especially when you're busy, when you put it all in one pot, you just put it in one pot and you go. You know what I mean? And it's not something that you have to sit there, like if you're frying something or you're really baking something, you know, you want to make sure that it's not burned, and you put it on a slow cook until it falls off the bone and it just tastes so good and you can move on, right? You're not necessarily there, waiting and waiting. Some people have a pilon. I don't use them. I have a pilon, but I gotta tell you, to be honest with you, and it's okay, it's soaked in water, and after violet cracks, it's just not something that, because it'll sit there, somebody will, you know, use it, and then they'll put it off to the side, and then the water after 4 hours. So for those who don't know what a bouillon is, so pretty much it's mortar, right, or you use it, a mortar, that's right, we call it bouillons. Actually, it's funny. I've been wanting to purchase a really big one so that I can do mofongo. And part of it's because I want it. I'm like, yes! Yes, so I agree. It'll help me relieve some of that stress. Again, I want to thank everybody for your time, for coming by today and in support of the Puerto Rican heritage as well as our African ancestry and having that discussion, because a lot of people in the United States, and the reality, many of us grew up here, we know that we were given limited education and limited information, and a lot of that information never included south of the U.S. border, even though Puerto Rico was the United States and we're a Commonwealth territory. That history of what happened to Puerto Rico was never included. So a lot of people were unaware that slavery has existed since 1502, when the first slave ship was brought to the island. And that was for only 4 years after Christopher Columbus invaded Puerto Rico. And part of that happens to do was that biowarfare was so good that when the Spaniards arrived, they brought their germs and their diseases. And the diseases, because the Americans had not been accustomed to those diseases, the indigenous people were greatly impacted, and that is really what weakened them, so that by the time the Spaniards returned, they returned to a population who was unable to fight back. So while this is heating up here, does anybody have any questions for me? also one of our sponsors. She is the founder of Puerto Rican Cultural Community in White Plains. She is also a member of Comité Noviembre, which is a large Puerto Rican organization in the state of New York. Would you like to discuss a little bit? Yes.
First of all, I'm so happy to support this effort to preserve our culture and discuss our history. As Damaris just stated, I am the chair of the White Plains Puerto Rican Cultural Committee, founded in 2020. And I'm also the treasurer of Comité Noviembre, which is another nonprofit organization that has existed for almost 40 years. And our mission is the same, is to preserve and promote our culture and the beautiful treasures that we bring through our culture, the music, the dance, the literature, and also now the culinary treasures that we bring as well. And part of that, as Damaris said, was brought to us from Africa. A lot of the flavors and a lot of the combinations of spices come to us because we are a combination of African, European, and the indigenous. And as Damaris was explaining, there was a thought that the Tainos or the indigenous people from the Caribbean were eliminated or went into, they went into extinction, but actually those peoples exist in our DNA. And for most of us, we are at least 30% African, at least 30% European, and whatever is left over for that, depending on where you come from, can be indigenous. So I did my own DNA, and actually my mother was Afro-Caribbean. We found out that her family originated from Nigeria, so I'm looking forward to exploring that further on a personal note. But I invite everyone to explore their DNA and their genetic history and ancestry so that you can know exactly where you're from. But all of that came together to bring us the treasures that we have before you today. Thank you.
So I'd also like to introduce who I did mention earlier, another of our sponsors who greatly helped us out this year, our very own mayor, Sean Patterson.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to Damaris and Riza and all the sponsors who put this event on today. It is very, very important that we're celebrating all of our cultures, that we're preserving our culture. As we know, and it's been stated over and over again, the Afro-Latino connection is very real. And people can't conquer what they can't divide, right? And so we have to make sure that we're always finding ways to look at the things in our culture that is similar. So much of our struggles are similar, so much of our music, our food, our worship, our celebrations are all together. And I don't even know if Damaris knows this, and so I have to get better about connecting sometimes what I do in my role as president of the African American Mayors to my role as the mayor here. Because I was in Puerto Rico in August for the Experience Here in Puerto Rico event. And I'm working with the senators, and I'm working with about 20 mayors from Puerto Rico, and the Chamber of Commerce, and Mickey Espada, and we're doing a lot of work around the economic development and the economic mobility, and the economic independence of Puerto Rico, the financial recovery, making sure that there are partnerships. You know, a mayor is a mayor is a mayor. We think of politics and we look at what happens in the federal level, right? But mayors dealing with delivering services to your people in your community every day, it's not Republican and Democrat. It's how do you pave roads, how do you deliver food, how do you make sure people can afford housing and utilities. And so I'm working a lot with the mayors in Puerto Rico, and actually I just left Atlanta this morning to come back home, and there was a delegation of mayors that came from Puerto Rico to the National League of Cities. And so we're trying to connect what we're doing with the African American mayors, the National League of Cities, and the mayors of Puerto Rico. And then we were in Barcelona, talking about Spain, last week with Mickey Espada, as well as the Puerto Rican Chamber of Commerce. And so we have to make sure we're doing that here. larger. And so please know that our administration is here to support and to work and uplift and uphold the Puerto Rican community. Just last Monday, we swore in Aristides Maldonado, but he says don't call him Aristides, is Art Maldonado. He is our Deputy Commissioner of Recreation, and he is proudly Puerto Rican and very, very happy to be here in Mount Vernon. So please, we want you to be fully integrated into the community. We can all celebrate our own cultures, but when we celebrate our strength and when we make ourselves like a quilt, quilts are some of the most amazing things. If you remember your grandmother's quilt on a bed, you know, it might have looked simple, but it was complex in the way that the colors and the textures and the fabrics were woven together. And when we take our culture and our fabrics and our passions and even our struggles and we weave them together and we make a quilt of our experiences, that's something that no one can separate. And so let's make sure that that's something that we're doing, and know that I'm here for it. And we are starting to plan. You ready to be on the committee? 3 Kings Day. 3 Kings Day. I mean, each year we have to make it larger and larger and larger. We want 3 Kings Day to be celebrated like Kwanzaa celebrated, you know, like everything else is celebrated in Mount Vernon, because what makes our community strong is the diversity of our community. And so I want to make sure that it's celebrated equally. Thank you so much for doing this. I'm bouncing between here and the kids' Thanksgiving because I'm sponsoring both of them. And then we have the Wiz happening in the Dole Center, so I'm going to run over there. But let's make sure that we're supporting all of the different activities that are happening and the cultural richness that is Mount Vernon. And we have to make sure we're teaching our kids, because each generation, if we don't teach them, there are some communities and cultures that are better at teaching and training. And I don't even want to use the word indoctrination because people think that's bad. But if we don't teach our children our history and keep the language alive and the culture alive, then it will be lost. And we're a melting pot, but I think the richness of our individuality is also still important. So thank you.
Sponsored by our New York State Senator Jamal Bailey. He unfortunately had a family situation coming up. He may be able to stop by later today. However, he does have a staff person with us if you'd like to stand up. Do you want to speak on like a minute on behalf of Senator Bailey? I'll be right back.
Hi, my name is Renell from State Senator Jamal T. Bailey's office. Senator Bailey, his wife happens to be of Puerto Rican descent, so he's very familiar with Puerto Rican culture. I'm not 100% familiar with Puerto Rican culture, but I know that we share many foods. I'm of Jamaican descent, so we have like the same foods but just different names. And as the senator has said before, we have bacalao. Jamaicans call it saltfish. If someone could give me the pronunciation of stewed chicken again in Spanish. Yes, so in Jamaica we call it stewed chicken. Yes, thank you. We also have, of course, mangoes, of course. We also have oxtail, but you guys cook it kind of different. I don't know what's the name of oxtail in Spanish, but can someone tell me? Labitos, okay. So I'm also learning Spanish with Duolingo. I picked up on Spanish probably like early high school. I took a brief break, but when the pandemic has started, I got on to Rosetta Stone and doing Duolingo, so I also try to keep my streak. So far, I've done 366 days, so hopefully I can continue that.
So like I mentioned, I far, what I have done is I use cilantro, green pepper, garlic, and onion. And then I mixed in, as I mentioned, this is gandules or pigeon peas. Right, and then I use the following seasonings. You can never go wrong with more garlic. I love garlic. Although my husband thinks I'm a vampire because I'm a night owl, so you know, so this is black pepper, adobo, garlic, and I do like my table salt with iodines, iodine in it because it is an important nutrient. Like yes, I use table salt. I also use sea salt, but the truth is that not all sea salt tastes the same. So sometimes it's hard to determine how salty it's going to be or not salty, right? And so for me, at this point, I know my table salt. I know how much salt it's going to have. That's what I'm going to use. But on other things that it doesn't necessarily need to be as salted, I may use sea salt. So as I mentioned, I mix it around first before I start adding the water. In the hopes that, it helps to absorb the spices into the rice before you add water. Right? I did. I also used olive oil so that, to help with the sauteing process. Sesame also. So this also helps add like a red coloring, kind of like saffron, right? So it adds a flavor, but it also adds that red pigment in for like yellow rice. When you're making yellow rice. And then as I mentioned, I do, and I'm not home, I would be using my own filtered water, but I just also noticed that again, it's just the flavor. And I do believe that the water does change the flavor of your food. Alright, so while this is gonna be, actually probably should have done meat first. While this is going to, you bring this to a boil, and then you wait till much of the water has evaporated and slowly, like right below the top of the rice line. Then you lower it, and then you cover it, and then you allow that to cook. Again, depending on how much rice you have, right, how much you're cooking. So it would take anywhere between 20 minutes to 45 minutes. Again, like I said, the prep time and then everything else. And so, but this is on a hot plate, I will definitely say it does not heat up like a regular gas oven, right? Gas heat heats up faster, and again, depending on the types of pots that you're using. So now we're gonna get started on the pollo guisado. So while because of time is of the essence, we did kind of get a late start, I would like to call the panel to come up and we can begin having that discussion in regards to slavery in Puerto Rico. Feel free in between, again, I wanted this to be a casual setting so that we were, pardon me, as if you were in my casa and you're all hanging out with me in the kitchen while I'm cooking and we're talking and we're having, a great vibe and having a great conversation. So, please join us as well. So I'm going to be joining them abolition of slavery in Puerto Rico. 2023 is the 150th year since slavery had been abolished in Puerto Rico. As I mentioned earlier, the first slave ship arrived in 1502. This is our panel. Julio Palon is the founder of Latino Sports, and he has also an organization in which he had an event last night at City Island. And then this is Melinda Gonzalez. And Julio, would you kindly tell us about your organization, who you are, and your event yesterday?
Empezar primeramente, gracias. Thank you. Buenas tardes, good afternoon. Great seeing some friends here. Yesterday we had an incredible event. It was an event called Urayan Awards. Very controversial because of the fact that all the people we were honoring in the name of Urayan, who was a cacique, the Taino chief cacique. When the Spaniards invaded Puerto Rico, a lot of the Tainos considered them gods because they were majority white. They had things that they were wearing, metal and stuff like that they looked totally different from the small lightning clanky stuff that the Tainos wore. So the Tainos welcomed them. And that's how we Puerto Ricans are. If you've ever been to Puerto Rico, you know, we welcome everybody. We take off our shirts, we give it to you. You want to come eat, you know, we have that ability. That's in our culture. That's in our DNA. We open our doors. We open our hearts to everybody. And unfortunately, the Tainos then realized that after decades that these people were killing, maiming, raping, and doing everything that's incredibly atrocious. And they realized, can these people really be gods? And there was one individual, his name is Urayan, who, by where we live in Caboro, Mayagüez, there's a river, and every time that a Spanish soldier would come by and wanted to cross the river, he would ask or tell two Tainos, come here, to put them on their shoulders so they can cross the river so he doesn't get his armor wet. One day, I don't know what happened, maybe Urayan had a great day, maybe he had a dream, but next day he said, the next time that Salcedo comes by and asks for him to be taken across the river and drowned, I want to see if the Spaniards are really gods. And of course, there's famous pictures of that. You know, I had a painting that's my own personal one that we brought to everybody wanted to buy it. I said you can't buy that because it shows what they were drowning in. And they realized, of course, he died. He was not a god. And because of that action, that opened up for other caciques like Guarionex, who was a warrior, and Aguebana, who was another warrior, to then start a war against the Spaniards. Though the war wasn't that successful in terms of winning and getting them out, it was successful in showing that, you know, there are people who can't stand enough of something and they react to it. And to us, that was a historical moment. So we give these awards, Urayan, to people that we feel have done something for Puerto Rico. People who have done something to make us proud. People who have done something to move our agenda forward. And we gotta be honest, sometimes we don't agree with the people in terms of one particular political thing. There might be a stateholder. I'm not a stateholder. I'm pro-independence. But there's a person who's a pro-stateholder, and hey, but we agree on one thing, that the Jones Act, which is a maritime law of 1920, that does not allow any foreign ship with a U.S. that doesn't have a U.S. flag, doesn't have a crew of over 70% U.S. citizens, and that ship was built in the United States, cannot dock in Puerto Rico. Recently, you might have heard the last storm, Fiona. We live in Puerto Rico, and we live here in New York. My wife wants to live permanently in Puerto Rico. We're working on that. But we were in Puerto Rico, and we always had an issue with, you know, oil, and because everything is imported, everything. 80-something% of our food and over close to 90% of everything in Puerto Rico is imported. And they were low on diesel. The Fiona hits, and now we're really bad on diesel because we have this incredible company called Luma Energy, which is one of the most corrupt companies you can imagine. We pay more for utility rates in Puerto Rico than we pay in Canada and here. And our rates have gone up 7 times until we had it, and we put in total 100% solar. And this company and the people that that we're doing things in Puerto Rico, we've learned that we have to be able to do something to respond to that. The fact that everything is imported, $8, $9 for a pint of Haagen-Dazs. $8 or close to $9, sometimes depending on for a gallon of milk. Sometimes we have to pay, you know those strawberries that we have in those plastic things that we get two for $5, $6 when you go down to Frutero on 149th Street. And Puerto Rico just won. Almost was it, we almost fainted. $9, $7. And that's part of the Jones Act. So anyway, this organization was done to be able to provide information to educate people, because a lot of people don't know about the Jones Act. When I told people about the Jones Act, they say, oh man, I love Puerto Rico. I go to Puerto Rico all the time, I vacation there, but I didn't know that. If you leave San Juan, which to me is New York with palm trees, if you leave San Juan and you come to where we live, in Cabo Rojo, which is the extreme other side of Puerto Rico. If you see Puerto Rico, this over here is San Juan, the extreme end here, I call it the West Coast. So here would be like New York, San Juan, and we live in the West Coast. And the West Coast, you see, like most of Puerto Rico, real Puerto Ricans, meaning that these are people who are not living in the metropolitan area. And what we have seen in the last 12 years living in Puerto Rico with common folks, people that, you know, we love because they live off the land, we trade. This guy brings me 6 eggs from his hands, and I said, oh, what's this? He said, for you. And I said, oh, but my aguacates fell down, so I give him some avocados, and this one comes over here. We have mangoes, galore, so we're always doing this, and we see what's really that type of life. But a lot of those people have left, and they're leaving because they cannot survive. One single mother, last one told us, who used to help us, because we have a guest house there, and they clean. She said, oh, you have to get someone else. I said, why? She said, we're moving. Where you going to? She said, we're going to Wisconsin. I said, you know how cold it is in Wisconsin? You guys want to go to Wisconsin? She said, yeah, my son and my brother live there, and he invited us to get a job there because we cannot continue. On electricity alone, this woman is paying $178 average a month. She makes $750 an hour. So that plus all the other stuff that's going on in Puerto Rico is this organization we started called Respect and Justice, which is basically to help, alleviate this issue of the Jones Act that nobody wants to touch. You never heard a politician talk about it, right? You never heard anybody taking up a position on it. But one person that we have a disagreement with has. His name is Richie Torres. He's the guy who's been saying all this stuff about Israel and about whatever, and not saying anything about the Palestinians, which I have issues with that. But on Puerto Rico, this is the only one. He was the one that submitted a bill saying that in any serious emergency in Puerto Rico, a non-US should be able to bring supplies. And what I was saying, that Hurricane Fiona knocked out 90% of the electricity in Puerto Rico. We had no electricity, and we had no diesel. Hospitals were about to close. A ship going to Chile had 300,000 gallons of diesel, turned it around and brought it to Puerto Rico, but it was not allowed to come into the port because it's not a U.S. ship. So basically it was held back. So for 3 days that ship was waiting while we were on the island waiting and desperately looking for diesel. Diesel is very important, not just for the hospitals and for the schools, but do you know that to pump gas from the gas station, so people who need a generator, need gas to run the generator, well, you know what pumps that gas? Diesel. So if you don't have diesel, you basically paralyze an area. Well, Puerto Rico was being paralyzed, and there was a ship with 300,000 gallons that was not allowed to dock. We were reached out, and Richie Torres was one of those with AOC and Nina Velazquez who put pressure on Biden. And within 48 hours, Biden lifted the restriction, and that ship was able to come in. So people like that, that's why we honor. Not because of anything else, but that's why we honor. And the other people that we honor, the judges, the positive workforce group, and the event was a tremendous success. Damaris was there yesterday. I don't think I saw you dancing too much, Damaris.
Well, I actually had to leave early so I could get ready for today.
When it went out on the internet, so many people heard about it in the event that we were giving these Curayon Awards, and because of the controversy that they were attacking us, saying, how dare you have this event and invite Richie Torres, the congressman, was saying all this stuff about, and said, listen, this has nothing to do with what we're doing. But you know, when you deal with extremist people, you know, and I think the mayor said right in the word, you know, if you don't divide, you can't conquer. If you divide, you conquer. If you don't divide, you can't conquer. And that's one of the problems we have in our community. You know, there's a lot of division. But the event was tremendous. I want to thank you, Damaris, for supporting. And everybody that was there learned so much because it was about Puerto Rico. By the way, today, November 19th, the law was changed. In Puerto Rico, for the last, since the 1930s or whatever, it was been recognized as Puerto Rico Discovery Day. It's a national holiday. Puerto Ricans have holidays for everything. And this people don't go to work on November 19th, it's on Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday. It's a real holiday, you know, that type of holiday. And they submitted a resolution, which is part of the change that we like to see in Puerto Rico and we're seeing throughout the United States, to correct history. And they submitted a resolution to change the name from el Día de Descubrimiento de Puerto Rico, the day of discovery of Puerto Rico, to el Día de la Puertorriqueñidad, to the day of our Puerto Ricanness, our Puerto Rican pride. What was interesting is that it was negotiated and passed in the assembly, the equivalent of the assembly, la legislatura, without not one vote coming from any statehood member of the PNP party. And it passed in the Senate with not one member of the PNP supporting that bill. So we figured, wow, we got a victory there, but it's not going to go anywhere because who's the governor? Pierluisi. He's one member of the PNP. But guess what? I don't know what negotiations they did. He signed it. And as of last month ago, La Ley 117 in Puerto Rico, everything is with numbers. Law 117 has changed the name. It is now El Día de la Puertorriqueñidad, no more El Día de Descubrimiento de Puerto Rico, because like you said, Damaris, we were there thousands of years, the Taínos and stuff. So that was my brief introduction, which is not that brief because I had to tell you about that event yesterday, because if you hear about it next year again, they told me to do it again, but my wife and I are so tired because hear my voice. We were the ones, you know how sometimes you have an idea, you say, let's do this, and you got 3 or 4 people saying, yeah, let's do it. And then when it gets closer, nobody's around you. It's basically you doing it by yourself, right? So my wife and I, if it wasn't for my daughters who came down from Massachusetts and my son who went from California to be able to help, it would have been much more difficult. But it was a fantastic event. Everybody, you know, I've been getting all these text messages all over saying that they learned so much about Puerto Rico because every single thing in that place was about Puerto Rico. The food, the beer, we didn't want Budweiser. It had to be Medalla. So we had Medalla beer. We had the centerpieces. We didn't want to buy flowers and that stuff. So my wife is an artisan, and she made these beautiful bottles that has everything from Puerto Rico, either the names or the patriots or speeches or whatever. Everybody was fighting to get one of those. So every single thing in this event was so Puerto Rican. You walked in, you saw Pedro Campo. You walked on the other side, you saw the Young Lords Party. You came in and you saw all the patriots from Puerto Rico, from Lolita Lebron all the way back to Mariana Bracetti. So it was an incredible event, and people told us they've been to so many banquets and so many dinners, but they had never been to a dinner like this. And then, of course, you know, as Puerto Ricans, we love to party. We love to party. And we had a band, Papolito, and that guy was incredible. And the DJ, one of the top DJs in the city, so we danced our heads off yesterday, and that was the event. So I'm telling you all this because next year, if you hear anywhere that they actually convinced me to do a third one, and you hear that we're named Urayoan Awards, please come and support it because all the money is going to respect and justice to continue our work to try to get Congress people to understand that this thing called the Jones Act is killing Puerto Rico, killing us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tony. I appreciate all your services. So, Melinda, you have some slides for us. You've got some information. Let's talk about slavery in Puerto Rico. And for many of you, you may not be aware, Puerto Rico is actually the only nation in the entire world that has been occupied the longest. Under military dictatorship, more or less. Obviously, we consider the United States militarized power. And so Puerto Rico, of all the nations in the world, Puerto Rico has been held captive for 500 years, for over 500 years, and we continue today, which is why there is the issues of statehood or independence. But today we are here to talk about slavery in Puerto Rico. Melinda Gonzalez, please get it started.
We'll talk about that. Thank you, Damaris and Rise Up and everyone who brought us all together here today. I really appreciate being here with you all. I'm first going to ask for some tech support because the monitor, the airdrop disconnected. So if we could get some tech support, I would really appreciate that. Okay. So, when I thought about, talking and sharing, because I like to think that we're going to have a moment to share with each other and discuss. Like, I don't want to spew out facts and information that, you're probably going to remember maybe one or two things. That's not the point of it. It's about having conversations about self-determination, about liberation, about community-driven solutions, about community. And there's unity in between that community, right? And so, for me, when I was young, a kid, and growing up in New York City and in Brooklyn, you don't really learn a lot about the history of Puerto Rico. You learn drips and drabs from your family. And you're like, okay, you sort of like kind of start piecing these pieces together. And you learn about slavery here in the US. And you think that kind of, there's the period at the end of that, and the concept of slavery in Puerto Rico and in other places, does it kind of like sink in with a broader sense of like what slavery looks like when we think about all of the Americas, from let's say Canada all the way down to Argentina, right? And if we want to go even further to Europe, right? So what the massive scale and operation that was, what arrangements were made with the church and with all these institutions that said, yes, I will agree to that. Yes, we will oppress people. Yes, we will dehumanize people and degrade them. And that was the arrangements we're going to talk about, because it's important to talk about them, because we don't talk about them in terms of a collective. We'll talk specifically about Puerto Rico, and I'll talk in broad strokes about some of the things that happened. But I don't want to make this like a super duper history lesson. It's about what was done. We're coming across there. While we're doing that, I just want to take a little bit of a left turn, because on my left is there's food here, and I think food and music are like the lowest common denominators. They bring us together. I want to ask you all, what are the foods that come from Africa that we eat on a daily basis, whether you're in the Caribbean, South America, Central America, the Americas, the US? What are some foods that you eat that you know that come from Africa? Huh? Plátanos, plantains, and what's one of our major dishes in Puerto Rico? Is mofongo, right? And so mofongo is take the fried plátanos and you mash them up in a pilon that Damaris mentioned, and you can use pork or protein with that. Anybody know what that sounds similar to, particularly in Ghana? That they mash fufu, right? And the interesting thing that I just recently learned about fufu is that I always thought about like African influence going to the Americas, but this is the opposite. This is juca, cassava, going to Africa, West Africa in particular, and they're creating something out of that fufu, which is fufu, which is a mashed juca. It's starchy with, and you take that piece and you take like a stew, almost like a guisado, and you pick it up and you eat it with your hands, right? And delicious. So I think that those are some of the bridging that we can do in terms of like our culinary delights What about something, let's go down to New Orleans and the South.
So I'm sorry that your words from what we're hearing next door and how it's traveled through here is hard to hear. So
I think what he's saying, well, Congo is similar to what you can find in Africa, and I think that's what he was talking about in Ghana. But I think they're going to give him a mic. But we're going to do a Q&A after the panel, so that any questions that you may have, we'll ask after the panelists have finished their discussion.
Okay. Can I ask you for tech support for the airdrop for the presentation? There was a gentleman here before who coordinated the airdrop, so can we have some support with that? Thank you so much. How about okra? How do you say okra in Spanish? Or at least in Puerto Rican Spanish? Quinoa, right? Quinoa. And so if you take those 4 words out, it sounds more like kind of like gumbo, right? So who else uses, where does gumbo that we know of come from? New Orleans, right? American South. And so we're going to talk a little bit also about the Haitian Revolution and how that spread out, because the enslaved people who free themselves. Because I think we cannot have a discussion about Puerto Rico and slavery without talking about the Haitian Revolution yet.
So that everybody understands, hot plates take up a tremendous amount of power. So typically you really don't want to run more than 1 hot plate at a time because they do take a lot of power. So while they're cooking, I've been tripping their system. So that's why, and then it knocked out the TVs. So good. Our technical challenges.
So okra is another piece. Melon, watermelon also comes from Africa as well too, right? I'm gonna move a little bit through this presentation because I think that piece about 90% that is up there on the wall is like, I can't remember when I first learned about that 90% of the enslaved Africans who were taken from Africa were taken to the Caribbean, Central America, and South America.
Can you say that number again?
90%.
98?
90.
90.
Yes.
So what that means is that only 10%
Only 10%
came to the United
Only
States.
10%.
Right, so of the 10 million that survived, so 12 million left Africa, were taken from Africa. The 10 million who survived, 90% went to the Caribbean and Latin America, and only 10% of the slave trade actually came to the United States. So 90%, and then because the Americas are so large, right, and there was already people there, then the mixing, but you typically find people of more of African descent living along the coastlines, because when the Spaniards came and invaded, it was very difficult for them to get through the jungles and over the mountains with their equipment. So which is typically why you would see along the coast Afro-Latinos.
So another point that I want to make as looking at the Sazon box is that the first enslaved people in Puerto Rico were the Taínos. So those are the people at the point of contact of the Spanish conquistadors coming in. Those were the people that they encountered, right? But there were also other groups of people, indigenous people, before them in different waves of people. I'm also looking at the seasoning that is used, which is achote, is something that the native people use as, and it's also an insect repellent. They use it for face paint and as an insect repellent as well. So that, and yuca also was a staple food for them. We're going into the first Africans that were brought were mostly people from Spain initially that were black, and some people were Moors or North Africans that were enslaved, and those were called Latinos, and they spoke Spanish, and they were one of the first people to rise up in rebellion, and that was one of the first documented cases was in 1515, as way back as that. Thank you. Sorry for the technical difficulties, but we'll work through them, right? So from the Latinos come the Bozales, and the Bozales are the ones that came from Africa. So we're just giving names, we're orienting ourselves, who's who and what's what. So before sugar was the main crop that was cultivated by enslaved Africans, it was actually gold, right? And the issue with the Taínos was like for the Taínos, gold was sacred, and you didn't mine gold at all. It was like sacrilege. So they had difficulties like in forcing the Taínos to mine gold. They brought in Africans to do that, but there wasn't a whole ton of gold in Puerto Rico itself. So that's where the sugar and other domestic fruit, came and cultivated. Then our next group is the cimarrones. What are the cimarrones? Runaways, right? These are people who were like, nah, I'm not doing this. This is not me. And they created communities. Puerto Rico, when I look at all of these, the tables with like the census is how many enslaved people, how many like freed people and runaways, it was always a large number of people. Puerto Rico wasn't, when we talk about the Spanish Empire, it didn't factor big into it because it didn't produce as much as like South America or other places did for the Spanish crown, right? So they were like, not as much attention was paid to Spain, and it was sort of in some decades more than others, it was like left to its own devices. And the other group, the last group, are the libertos, and these are people who are freed. Sometimes they were able to buy their own freedom or purchase that of their relatives. And in Puerto Rico, there were actually more opportunity to do that than in the U.S. too. I'm just gonna go through a super brief timeline. And this is by no means like a comprehensive history of the the slavery in Puerto Rico, but there's some key moments in times, like I mentioned, the Haitian Revolution in 1804 and the significance of that. Haiti sent envoys to Puerto Rico and to all parts of the Caribbean islands. It wasn't just about their liberation, it was about the liberation of the Caribbean and everywhere they could. Okay, so we're gonna touch on that a little more deeply in just a minute. In 1821, there was an uprising in Bayamon. That's a town not far from San Juan, and again in just a minute we're gonna talk a little bit more deep with that, because after the Haitian Revolution, which was one of the largest producers of sugarcane, now they're looking at other places to replenish that supply. And Puerto Rico was one place, so that number of enslaved people started to increase and double and triple and quadruple. And Bayamon was one of the places that received a lot of enslaved Africans. The Ley Moret was in 1873 is when the abolition of slavery, we use that as a marker date, but in reality it had started. They started to liberate people in certain groups, like people over 60, where you could be, free if you were a child. But those people and those groups really depend on adults, right? So a lot.
If you were a child and you were baptized, then you could be free. If you were a child and you were poor and you didn't have money to be baptized, you're still gonna be a slave. And in Mayagüez, there's a church. If you ever visit Mayagüez, across from the plaza, there's a plaque for Dr. Juan Emeterio Betances and Segundo Luis Belvis. And those individuals, doctors, would go and take care of the rich. And every Sunday, they would go to the steps of that church, and there will be a line of black slaves that will bring their babies and get online. They will take their turns, and they will then pay the priest to baptize that child until they ran out of money that Sunday. And that was a part of the history of Puerto Rico and Mayagüez.
Absolutely, and Mayagüez is received a lot after the Haitian Revolution, that all these like slave owners were running away from the revolution. They were landing in Mayagüez and that west coast in Puerto Rico, as well. In 1873, I think one of the main things I'd like for you to walk away with is that there was a process that was outlined for emancipation, and so that took a 3-year process, and so some of the also slave owners were paid. There are circumstances where we have to understand that people were kind of paid off and said, okay, when does that happen, and really thinking about how a system kind of transfers. And it never really, in a sense, when I thought about like, wow, the government is actually paying the slave owner, almost compensating them for their enslaved person. At some points, they had to work. Some of them had to work for 3 years. But in terms of official numbers, there were about 10,000 at that time that were emancipated, so to give like a round off number. And I wanted to jump a little bit because in 1803 is when, 1808 is when officially is when the trafficking of Africans was supposed to be outlawed, but it never really was, right? So that was 1808. And the reason why we know that is because if anybody has watched a PBS special, and the Smithsonian has done work on that, there was a slave ship called the Clotilda that landed in 1860 near Mobile, Alabama. And that brought 110 captives from the kingdom of Benin. And the reason why part of that is important is because Zora Neale Hurston wrote a book called Barracoon, and it documents the history of one of those people. And his name was just out of my head. But those people also created what was known as Africa Town, that's being explored now more thoroughly. But to kind of draw some parallels with that, the same year, like that law in 1808 applied to Puerto Rico as well, so the trafficking of Africans was outlawed. But we know because the last documented illegal slave ship arrived off the coast of Humacao in 1859. And that ship was called the Majesty. And aboard that ship left Africa, West Africa, with 1,000 or more captives, because they weren't enslaved yet, but captives. And there was about 100 to 200 that were lost during that passage. And 629 arrived in Puerto Rico and Humacao. Of those, 300 were children. And I mean, that's ghastly. When I just let us learn that was like, we just have to take a moment for understanding like why. Because I asked myself, why exactly children were valued? Because they were smaller, they could fit more on the slave ship. They had a longer lifespan, so they could work as slaves longer, right? They eat less food. They were entertainment on top of the ship for the crew. And so I think that we were at a school Friday and we talked about that, and we you look at children and you just want them to live happy and free, and to know that, you know, the life ahead of them was a life of bondage. That it's just really moving. Yeah. So some of them stayed in Humacao, and others literally came in, like slave owners came in carts to pick them, some of them up. In 2 weeks, about 70 of them had died. So there are researchers doing a pretty good amount of work on that. So the reason how I learned this was I attended the Bomba Research Conference during Labor Day weekend, this past September. And there was a webinar on this with like the researchers, but we also went to Humacao and we laid flowers at the river's edge, the shore line, to remember our ancestors who were the ones that perished in the way, and the children and the people that we, you know, are nameless. They may have taken were given or forcibly given their slave owner's name, but you know, so much of that history has been erased. Even the ones that died were put in a mass grave. They weren't given like funeral.
I did want to point out a couple things for what a lot of people don't realize and having that discussion. So when the Spaniards first arrived as sailors, they never brought their women on the boats, right? So by the time they landed, they were very like running bulls. I don't know what else to call it, right? And so in our DNA today, they can only find our matriarchal Tainos because all the men had been killed, right? All the men had been murdered because they were probably trying to protect their women of everything that was going on and protect their country and their land. And so that was the first group that the Spaniards went after, were to kill the Taino men. And then replace them with African male slaves, right, and females and children. And the other thing that I did want to point out is that there was a law that was passed in the 1600s, and Spain began to realize and seeing what was going on with the rest of the Caribbean and seeing what's going on in the rest of Latin America, that there was a lot of mixing that was going on. And so Spain had three important ports that they decided that was going to be their financial ports, right? So it was going to be Puerto Rico, Argentina, and Venezuela, right? And so Venezuela was the banking industry for Spain. Puerto Rico was the last port, because Puerto Rico, from a geographic point, is located so that it is, which is why Spain and the United States have insisted on holding it, is because it's militarily strategically located. And so what Spain decided to do was they banned how many slaves per slave owner were allowed to come in, because they were noticing in the other Caribbean islands that there was a lot more mixing. So what they decided to do, they basically numbered it that for every one slave owner, they were only allowed to have like 9 or 10 slaves. They were not allowed to have hundreds of slaves. So which is why when you do look at the demographics or the way Puerto Ricans look in comparison to, let's say, Jamaicans or Bahamians and Cubans and Dominicans and Haitians, right? Puerto Ricans tend to be light because of one law that was passed in the 1600s in the attempt to minimize the mixing, because again, the Spaniards did not bring their women with them, right? And then there was one last thing that I definitely wanted to say, but it's a little reminder, so please continue.
I'd like to share one other tidbit on this that people don't know too much, but I think is interesting. Where I'm from, Cabo, where we live now, there was a pirate. His name was Cofresi. And Cofresi was like a really badass pirate. I mean, you guys have heard of Blackbeard, and you've heard of Blackfoot, and you've heard about Captain Hook, and you heard about these guys. Cofresi, or Captain Morgan, Cofresi had discrimination. He was a true pirate. Any ship that was coming towards Puerto Rico,
know if that ship was coming from Africa or if it was coming from Spain bringing gold. So Cofresi didn't discriminate. This Puerto Rican pirate would go after all of them. And when he captured the ship and he noticed that there were no gold, but there was black slaves, he brought them south of Puerto Rico to where I was born, Guayama, which is one of the most black, most negroid brujos in Puerto Rico. And he dropped them off by this barrio called Puerto Jobo, which we lived in. When I used to go there, I was like the lightest guy. You know, in 1970, the University of Puerto Rico did a study on the bone structure and the teeth of the residents of Puerto Jobo, and check this out. 1970, Puerto Jobo still had 90% unmixed African blood. 90% unmixed African blood. So that's the part of the history that people don't know. When they go to Puerto Rico, they go to Loíza Aldea in the north because it's touristy. That's where, you know, a lot of tourists go to have good empanadas, alcapugias, and good fish. Loíza Aldea, you know, that's the black area people think. But no, the real black area is come south. Come to Guayama. The first poetry, the first words ever mentioned about la negruida, the blackness of Puerto Rico, was written by a guy from Guayama, Luis Pales Matos, in his poetry, talking about the blackness of Puerto Rico. So Guayama, which is where I was born, I'm very proud of it, has a very rich history of dealing with the whole African aspect.
Absolutely. I went to, not Guayama, Patillas.
Patillas, our next.
In Patillas, not far from Guayama, there's a street called Calle de los Congos. So just right there in plain view of what that heritage looked like. In Congo, just to be clear, Congo, what we know of the country, the Democratic Republic of Congo, we're talking about a larger region like the Kingdom of Congo. So just want to make that differentiation. Jose, you had a question?
Yeah, I do have a question. Hello? Okay, if I can speak up. But no, I really appreciate when you're going in. I know that originally you said you're going to be skipping to some things because you want to just outline these things, and I think that's cool. I love when you mention something that I think that systemically we may not think about it, but when you mention the Bomba Research Conference.
Works?
It works out.
So, to me, that's a treasure. Is there anyone was paying attention to the Bomba Research Conference? And not looking at it as a folkloric dance, that what we're learning today and how we are really connecting with our history is to really get to a better understanding of what Bomba really is and how we can learn more about our culture through Bomba. So, thank you. And also, just to mention that Melinda, you also have received La Mejor de Nuestra Comunidad Award from the Comité. What year was that? Around maybe 2011, maybe?
Yeah, I think so.
Right? And why did you get that award? Why? Because you was bringing something to, no, I'll tell you why. Because you was bringing something to the community that we were not aware of, which is Bomba. That's my point. She got an award for something that today, we may not get that award because now we all think we know what Bomba is just because we see it on Facebook. But we're talking about a time when it wasn't in the city, when it wasn't acknowledged as a cultural identity. So people like Melinda, like Bombayo, Wilson, this is what I'm trying to say, is that we didn't just get here. And this is why we need to connect with our history, right? Because there's a lot that we do not understand about our history. So we need to relearn, this is how we learn, going backwards, not forward, because what's coming ahead, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. Thank you.
I would say that the past really helps us to understand and lay ground for the future. Because knowing this history, knowing the centuries that we resisted, from our indigenous ancestors to our African ancestors, that's in our DNA as well. That resistance, that defiance, that way of saying, let's come together and have these. One of the things that is part of the Bomba Research Conference is lugares históricos, and that's putting a physical plaque up on sites of Black culture in Puerto Rico. That's to physically tell people we are here, right? And that's something that we could also be doing wherever we're at, you know? But you talk about the touristy sections, you know, you can actually travel, make a trip of traveling to those places, lugares históricos, when you're in Puerto Rico, so that you are filled with, with the essence of the Black culture and what happened and how people showed up. I want to talk about Ponce. You mentioned Ponce before, because I'm not from Ponce.
Just there.
But in 2 years ago, when I attended another Bomba research conference in Ponce, a man stood up and said, to be a bombero in the 1950s, you had to be atrevido. What is atrevido in English? Daring, bold, right? Because it wasn't okay. Cops would come in and bust your drums and take you to jail. That's how some of the researchers know who are bomberos, because they're in the police logs. They're on the police logs. That wasn't okay to do, and that yet we're in Mount Vernon on a Sunday evening and afternoon ready to play bomba. It's the legacy that we hold so dear. It is so powerful. When I put it's transformative, it is transformative. It really does change your sense of self and who you are and how you walk in this world. Because that's who you come from. When there are problems that we face right now as a community, draw back from that well of resistance, of defiance, of atrevido, being atrevido and atrevida, and say, no, we know how to solve our own problems. We don't need anybody helicoptering in. We do that. We take the lead. That's the essence of self-determination. I want to talk a little bit about the personal aspect of this, because the personal is political. We are part of history. I think this is historical too. Having all of this multi-sensory things going on, food and music and conversation going on too. So I want to share a little bit of my own family history with you. When I started Bomba 20 years ago, there was a group called Los Herederos de Ciorro. And herederos is the heirs, and Ciorro, if you look at the screen, there's a person named Marcos Ciorro, who was an enslaved African in Bayamon that we talked about in 1821, who started an uprising along with Hilario, another enslaved African. And so and this is part of a book called Slave Revolts in Puerto Rico. So this piece of it talks about Marcos Ciorro, the person who thought he owned Marcos Ciorro his name was Vicente Andino. And Marcos Ciorro traveled to Mayagüez, again it comes up, to seek aid, and most likely, as it says this in Spanish there, that more than likely he was getting aid from Haiti. Again, another reference to Haiti and the support that we get from Haiti in our own liberation. So when I did my own family research, and it's really tough. We had to use a genealogist. At that time, we were just hitting walls. And so we learned that we had an ancestor that came from Africa, and there was documentation of that. We learned that he was in Bayamon. We learned that he was in the hacienda of Vicente Andino, the same where Marcos Ciorro was at that same time. He had a daughter whose name was Maria Faustina Andino Marrero. And Maria Faustina was born in 1783, and she died in 1873. Yes, she was 110 years old. She lived a long life. Yeah.
Excuse me for the interruption, because I know time we still want to get to the bomba performance. I have a poetress here who I want her to share her amazing poem with us. But I do have to interrupt, pardon me, I'm going to interrupt for our very own Congressman Jamal Bowman here in the city of Mount Vernon, as well as the Bronx, Yonkers, and a good portion of Westchester County.
Bronx, Yonkers, White Plains, Portchester, New Rochelle. Absolutely. Good evening, everyone. It's really good to be here. Sorry I'm late. I had like 5 other events, but I just wanted to come say hello, share my love and myself with you and the work you do. Thank you so much for this. This is the second annual? Second annual. Now, last year I was there earlier and I stayed longer and I participated. So I get a little pass this year. Thank you for continuing to tap into the history and the culture and the cultural connections and the need for self-determination and empowerment. Oftentimes, they always try to separate us and put us in silos, and we know very well that our unity is our power, our diversity is our power, and our history is our power. And self-determination is critical right now, not just for Puerto Rico, but all of us right here in this district, in this county, in this state, in this city right now. No matter what, we are the people who have to organize to fight for justice, to fight for freedom, to fight for equality, for all oppressed people, no matter what. And this smelling good food is part of that fight. It is part of that revolution. And so just want to say hello. Thank you again for letting me say a few words. And I'm gonna stay for the poet, and I want to see all of that. I'm gonna run next door real quick to say hi to somebody, and I'll be right back. Thank you for allowing me to say hello, and good to be with you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually,
Hello, testing. So you talked about mixing of races, and I see the word legacy on the screen. So I wondered, do you have anything to say about the social stratification of people based on race? And, you know, I know that, like, for example, the criollos had one identifying, or several identifying factors based on race, and then the mulattoes, and each stratification had a social value based on how much whiteness or blackness they had. Could you touch on that a little bit?
You want to go or you want me to?
Well, without being a historian or just being Puerto Rican, one of the things that you know is that we are like the rainbow people. We come in all shades and colors. I have 2 daughters, same mother, same father, me. They definitely look like me, so I know those are my daughters. But we were just having a conversation this morning because they came over yesterday, and I called them the yin and yang, because one of them, Kimberly, is dark-skinned. She's my complexion, a little bit darker, and always had hassles, you know, when she traveled different places. And Taina is so light that she looks Italian. She doesn't look Boricua. So, you know, that's part of our situation. We have names for each other. I have an uncle, a political uncle. His name was Boni Guayama. He was so black, he was blue. So, you know, when I see a person like Boni, right? I used to tell Boni, if you go to 125th Street in Harlem, you don't say anything. Nobody's going to talk to you in Spanish, because, you know, that was Boni. And then we have someone like my mother. My mother was light-skinned with hazel eyes. And this is one of the reasons we were able to get an apartment in Brooklyn, because they thought she was Italian. Because if it was my father, who was a migrant farm worker, who was dark-skinned, they wouldn't rent us an apartment. So my mother was the one that got us the apartments in, you know, parts of Brooklyn when it was all Italian. So we always had names for them. Este es mulato. Este es un colorado. You know, que es un colorado. This guy has a little bit of red hair. He looks, you know, some freckles, colorado. You know, este es un indio, right? My nephew, we used to call him Chino because of his eyes, the way he looks, and he's light skinned. So we do have these names that we give to different people that within our culture, all Puerto Rican, but we are definitely the rainbow people.
In 1930 to 1940, there were 3 censuses. I don't know what's the plural of that. But for my grandfather, the first one, the 1930 census, he was negro. Then the second one, he was de color. And by 1940, he was white. This is the U.S. Americans taking their interpretation of what color my grandfather was supposed to be according to them. So I know we have to move forward.
And the same thing had occurred in my family as well, but what was interesting, it was listed as colored, and then eventually it was for my grandfather. And I thought it was really interesting because my grandfather's, all of his children were listed as colored, and he was the one at first listed as colored, and then eventually he got the white designation faster. But the rest of his family were never given that designation. So I always thought it was interesting, depending on obviously who was sitting there. I do want to, I'm not sure how much more you do have. That's good.
I would just like that last thing that you referred to the 110-year-old woman. I would like for you just to finish that because I was curious about that. Can you just let me know more about that?
Can I make a comment? Right.
Oh, yes.
So concerning the mixing of the races and everything, it was the Spaniards that came up with the caste system, the costa, and so the mixing of the races, and then there was the class system that came right behind it. That was it.
So, sorry. So if you notice next to Maria Faustina Andino Marrero, it says tatara tatara abuela, right? So yeah. So she's my tatara is great. So it's great grandmother, and so the enslaved African would be my great grandfather. And so that's roughly about 7 generations from the point of, being taken from Africa to me, and also my sister, because we were both of us did our genealogy, and that was and that's why honestly genealogy is really important, because they can decipher all of this text that is really, really difficult to understand. One of the references, it says, hija legítima, right? So it's also acknowledging the legitimate and illegitimate children of it, and it will say if you're, I forgot the word for it, but if you're illegitimate or you're recognized child of that person. Going back to my great-grandfather, my grandfather had 26 kids, and that's just the ones that are counted for. Yeah. So, and some of them are listed as, we know them either as legitimate or illegitimate, children. Things are more relaxed now, and so in terms of social structures, but, back then it was important. And for just a little note, if you are interested in doing your genealogy, where your relatives are from, the barrio, as specific as you can get, their names are super important. You can get the birth records and death records and marriage certificates from that. Also, the Catholic Church, it was helpful too. But that's how you start your journey, is going down. I was in the National Archives and Records Administration for 20 hours, not all together, but to find my family in Aguadilla, and I found them. But after a while, sometimes you hit walls, and thankfully we have researchers that do wonderful jobs. I just want to lastly point to this photo, because this photo I took at the Bomba Research Conference when we were in Humacao. This is exactly the site of where the Majestad, or the Majesty, ran aground. This is where 629 captives from Africa landed. And this is some members of the Cepeda family that you'll know of. They're a very well-known Bomba family, but there's 7 generations of that family who did Bomba. And their mother, they're known to be from Santurce, but the mom, the matriarch, Doña Caridad Brenes, was from Humacao and has been traced to these people. So I just want to leave with that, we can touch the past, but, we remain in the present and we forge our future together. Thank you.
All right. We got some collaboration going on here. Hi, thank you for coming. Thank you for inviting me.
Congratulations, yes. And give it up
Thank
for
you.
the panel. Give it up for Melinda Gonzalez and Julio Pavon. And I want to repeat those words, that we can touch the past. We can touch the past. And we remain in the present. And we forge our future together. Yes. My name is Mariposa. Mariposa is my poetic name. My complete name is Maria Teresa Mariposa Fernandez de Rosario de las Maripositas. And I was born and raised in the Bronx. Yes, my grandparents arrived on both sides of my family in New York in 1930, and my parents were born in Harlem. My mother grew up in El Barrio in Spanish Harlem, and my father his family moved up to the Bronx, where I was born. And this is a poem called Ode to the Diasporican. And Wilson is gonna back me up. Thank you so much, Wilson. How many people in the room first speak Spanish? All right, and how many would like a full bilingual version to get the translation? Okay, so then this is gonna be in Spanglish, and which is actually my first language. Yeah, Ode to the Diasporican, for all the Diasporicans. And for Caribbean people also that relate, that connect to their homelands, and other people that have homelands that they were born far away from but feel it in their heart, And this poem actually was inspired by Kwame Nkrumah's line. What he said was, "You may not have been born in Africa, but Africa was born in you." Mira mi cara puertorriqueña, look at my Puerto Rican face. A mi pelo vivo, at my lively hair. A mis manos morenas, at my black hands. Mira mi corazón que se llena de orgullo, look at my heart that fills itself with pride. Y dime que no soy boricua, and tell me that I'm not Puerto Rican. Some people say that I'm not the real thing, Boricua that is, because I wasn't born on the Enchanted Island, because I was born on the mainland north of Spanish Harlem, because I was born in the Bronx. Some people think that I'm not bona fide because my playground was a concrete jungle, because my Rio Grande de Loíza, a beautiful river in Puerto Rico, I hope you can see it one day, was the Bronx River. Because my Fajardo, the town where my abuelita was born, was City Island. And my Luquillo, one of the most beautiful beaches on the island, was Orchard Beach. And summer nights were filled with city noises instead of coquis. And Puerto Rico, was just some paradise that we only saw in pictures. What does it mean to live in between? What does it take to realize that being Boricua is a state of mind, a state of heart, a state of soul? Mira mi cara puertorriqueña, a mi pelo vivo, a mis manos morenas. Mira mi corazón que se llena de orgullo. Y dime que no soy boricua. Mira mi cara puertorriqueña, look at my Puerto Rican face, a mi pelo vivo, at my lively hair, a mis manos morenas, at my black hands. Mira mi corazón que se llena de orgullo. Look at my heart that fills itself with pride. Y dime que no soy boricua, and tell me that I ain't Puerto Rican. No nací en Puerto Rico. I wasn't born in Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico nació en mí. Puerto Rico was born in me. Thank you. Thank you so much. Gracias.
Rob, so I wanted to say, thank you so much, Mariposa, for coming. I had the honor to hear her on Friday night at the El Comité Awards Gala, their annual gala that they had. And when I heard her poem, I was like, oh my God, that's amazing. I'm like, can I read your poem at my event? And she's like, I can come. I was like, really? At the last minute, she was like, listen, if anything comes up, I'll send you the poem. She's like, but you're in Mount Vernon. She's like, I'm in the Bronx. I was like, oh, we're right next door. So I'm so honored for you joining us and sharing that poem with us. Thank you very much. Thank you. So I do want to now, we're going to do our, so I'm going to serve food while we have a performance.
Tú no sabes, amiga Lola, lo que me pasó, que uno de tu hermoso amigo me comprometió.
Tú no sabes, amiga Lola, lo que me pasó, que uno de tu hermoso amigo me comprometió.
Me comprometió. Tú no sabes, amiga Lola, lo que me pasó.
Tú no sabes, amiga Lola, lo que me pasó, que uno de tu hermoso amigo me comprometió.
A las 5 de la mañana y al amanecer. Tú no sabes, amiga Lola, lo que me pasó.
Tú no sabes, amiga Lola, lo que me pasó, que uno de tu hermoso amigo me comprometió.
Me comprometió sin saber por qué. A las 5 de la mañana y al amanecer.
Tú no sabes, amiga Lola, lo que me pasó, que uno de tu hermoso amigo me comprometió.
Me comprometió sin saber por qué. A las 5 de la mañana y al amanecer.
Tú no sabes, amiga Lola, lo que me pasó, que uno de tu hermoso amigo me comprometió.
A las 5 de la mañana y al amanecer. En un baile bomba allá en el pueblo de Mayagüez.
Tú no sabes, amiga Lola, lo que me pasó, que uno de tu hermoso amigo me comprometió.
Me comprometió. Tú no sabes, amiga Lola, lo que me pasó.
Tú no sabes, amiga Lola, lo que me pasó, que uno de tu hermoso amigo me comprometió.
Tú no sabes, amiga Lola, lo que me pasó.
Uno de tu hermoso amigo me comprometió. Bomba. Eso. Sire, si yo me voy para Mayagüez. Sire, porque están tocando mi balance.
Sire, yo me voy para Mayagüez. Sire, porque están tocando mi balance.
Ay, sire, si yo me voy para Mayagüez. están tocando mi balance.
Yo me voy para Mayagüez.
Para Mayagüez.
Tire, porque están tocando mi balance.
Ahí te están tocando bomba, te están tocando una web. Ay, tire, y yo me voy para Mayagüez.
Tire, yo me voy para Mayagüez. Tire, porque están tocando mi balance.
Ahí domingo, lunes, martes, no sé cuándo llegaré. Ay, tire, yo me voy para Mayagüez.
Tire, yo me voy para Mayagüez.
Tire, porque están tocando mi balance. Ahí te están bailando, ay, qué rica mi bandule. Ay, tire, yo me voy para Mayagüez. Tire, yo me voy para Mayagüez.
Tire, porque están tocando mi balance.
Ahí llegó la bailadora, ay, qué rica, Aquí yo me cubre, bailando mi balance.
Tire, yo me voy para Mayagüez. Tire, porque están tocando mi balance.
Ahí tire, y yo me voy para Mayagüez. Ay, tire, porque están tocando mi balance.
Tire, yo me voy para Mayagüez. Tire, porque están tocando mi balance.
Ahí tire, y yo me voy para Mayagüez. Ay, tire, porque están tocando mi balance.
Tire, yo me voy para Mayagüez. Tire, porque están tocando mi balance.
Ahí te están bailando mi balance. Ay, tire, yo me voy para Mayagüez.
Tire, yo me voy para Mayagüez. Tire, porque están tocando mi balance.
Ahí tire. Esta noche vamos a gozar con el balance.
Tire, yo me voy para Mayagüez.
Tire, porque están tocando mi balance. Ahí bailando la bomba, aquí hoy yo me cure. Ay, tire, yo me voy para Mayagüez.
Tire, yo me voy para Mayagüez. Tire, porque están tocando mi balance.
Ahí domingo, lunes, martes, no sé cuándo llegaré. Ay, tire, y yo me voy para Mayagüez.
Tire, yo me voy para Mayagüez. Tire, porque están tocando mi balance.
¡Bomba! Cuente nada más, un cuente para bailar. Cuente nada más, ay, cuente papá.
Cuente nada más.
Ay, un cuente para bailar.
Cuente nada más.
Ay, cuente nada más.
Cuente nada más.
Ay, un cuente nada más.
Cuente nada más.
Con los barriles, con los guas.
Cuente nada más.
Ay, cuente nada más.
Cuente nada más.
¿Dónde están los boricuas para bailar?
Cuente nada más.
Que vengan ahora a bailar boca.
Cuente nada más.
Cuente nada más.
Cuente
tu bailar. Mueve, mueve mama, mueve, mueve mama, mueve, mueve mama. Boca a boca, mueve mama, mueve, mueve mama. Para bailar, mueve, mueve mama, mueve mama, mueve papá, mueve, mueve mama. Esto es para tu bailar, mueve, mueve mama, mueve mama, mueve papá, mueve, mueve mama. Que el goce mueve papá, mueve, mueve mama. Baila, baila boricua, mueve, mueve mama. Costorico de Rivera, mueve, mueve mama. Apure, apura, mueve, mueve mama. Mueve, mueve mama, mueve, mueve mama. Mueve para bailar, mueve, mueve mama. Mueve, mueve mama, mueve, mueve mama. Apure, apura, mueve, mueve mama. Tengo mama, mueve, mueve mama. Para bailar, mueve, mueve mama. Bomba, boricua, mueve, mueve mama. Amurea, mueve, mueve mama. Fuera, mueve, mueve mama. Wepa, wepa.
There's more food, please, because otherwise I gotta take it home. So take some home. Yes, please.
Today, when it comes to like the understanding of our culture, right, and like what happens when people like looking at something and seeing it as a performance.
Microphone.
And not recognizing that this music, like the oldest African derived music on the island, a music that has been outlawed, that survived through the foot of oppression, and that reality, like this didn't just get here, and that it's still surviving, and mainly among our own people, because if I was, let's say, if I was in a Greek community, and we're doing a culture, and everybody gets up and go, opa, right? Because that's the culture of understanding. When Bomba, what happened when Bomba comes to our community? You see, I know this, everybody said, oh, Dr. Drummond's gonna talk because, you see, there's something that Bomba gave me that before Bomba I would not even do. And that's even just stand up and talk. So Bomba gave me something, gave me a voice. So it is where I have my own sovereignty. This is my liberation. Even though I'm living under a system, even though the system, I know the system is corrupted. I know all that stuff. I mean, even to today, war hurting what's happening up in Palestine. But we still go to work and we get paid, and we don't realize it, that we funded those missiles and those bombs. That's the silence that we continue to live through every day. So I'm going to talk the truth because this is the truth, whether you like it or not. Because this is my only way this is where I get to be who I am, who I get to be me. So I'm not performing for you, no. This is me rising, acknowledging my roots. So when you come out to dance Bomba, you're not coming out to perform. And if you're Boricua and don't know what to do, then you got a problem. That's right. Because we're not competing here, we're dancing. Why are we dancing, is my point. Why do we dance? Because it is sacred. But this country made a joke out of dance. They made it a party. But this was always sacred. The original culture to dance is supposed to be who we are. That's why we dance. We dance to heal. We don't dance to play around. We dance to honor our ancestors. We're not dancing to compete. This ain't about being in first place. This is about the human race, the real race. That's why we dance. That's why we dance, and that's why I play. It's true, because this is giving me what's real. And it's not just for me, it's for all of us. So I'm going to go in there and play, and I want you to dance. Not to perform, but to let go. Let go of something, whatever's holding you back that says this is, no, it's to say, wait a minute, let me see who I am, let me feel it. Feel it. Don't be afraid. If you're going back to work tomorrow and get that paycheck, then don't be afraid to dance. You're doing it for everything else. Do it for this. Do it for the real thing. Do it for yourself and for our ancestors. Thank you, sir. And I apologize, for if I interrupted you, but thank you.
Fuego, fuego en Bucana, hay fuego la hacienda en Bucana.
Fuego, fuego en Bucana,
hay fuego en la central.
Fuego, fuego en Bucana,
que se quema caña en Bucana.
Fuego, fuego en Bucana,
hay fuego, fuego, fuego en Bucana.
Fuego, fuego en Bucana,
con los barriles de bomba.
Fuego, fuego en Bucana,
hay fuego en Bucana.
Fuego, fuego en Bucana,
hay fuego, fuego, fuego ya.
Fuego, fuego en Bucana,
con Jessica vamos a cantar.
Fuego, fuego en Bucana,
hay fuego en Bucana.
Fuego, fuego en Bucana,
en Puerto Rico la bomba mamá.
Fuego, fuego en Bucana,
hay fuego, fuego en la central.
Fuego, fuego en Bucana,
la bomba como va.
Fuego, fuego en Bucana,
Fuego en la central.
Fuego, fuego en Bucana,
Mariposa baila bomba.
Fuego, fuego en Bucana,
Mira cómo ya repica.
Fuego, fuego en Bucana,
Ay, fuego, fuego en la central.
Fuego, fuego en Bucana,
Que se quema caña en Bucana.
Fuego, fuego en
Que se
Bucana,
quema caña, caña en la central.
Fuego, fuego en Bucana,
Con la baraca y ropa.
Fuego, fuego en
La
Bucana,
nena va a bailar mi bomba ahora.
Fuego, fuego en Bucana,
Fuego, fuego en la central.
Fuego, fuego en Bucana,
Repica bomba como va.
Fuego, fuego en Bucana,
Mariposa baila bomba mamá.
Fuego, fuego en Bucana,
Fuego, fuego en la central.
Fuego, fuego en Bucana,
Fuego, fuego en Bucana.
Fuego, fuego en Bucana,
Fuego, fuego en la central.
Fuego, fuego en
Con
Bucana,
los barriles de mi bomba ya.
Fuego, fuego en Bucana,
Bomba, bomba, negrito vaya allá, va por la S allá, allá, va por la S allá, allá, va por la S 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 allá, toma, va por la S allá, va por la S allá, va por la S allá, está para tu bailar, va por la S, está para tu cantar, va por la S allá, 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 opa, va por la S allá, 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 besa, 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 ahí vamos la, ahí vamos la, besa allá, para tu gata, besa allá, bomba yo ama, bomba no va, besa allá, besa mamá, besa papá, besa allá, mi mamá allá, besa bomba, besa allá, besa allá, besa allá, besa allá, besa allá, toma, besa, 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 besa,
Yeah, not yet. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us this evening and for honoring Puerto Rican Heritage Month and joining us and supporting our event. Congressman Bowman, thank you for joining us the second year in a row and supporting us because he's also has been integral in sponsoring the event, as well as other elected officials, unfortunately, who were unable to attend. But I definitely wanted to thank everybody for participating and joining us today, including Mayor Sean Howard Patterson, as well as a representative from State Senator Jamal Bailey's office, and as well as I mentioned, our very own Congressman Jamal Bowman, and Tyree Samuels Woodson was going to join us today. Unfortunately, was unable to attend at the moment. But I want to thank everybody in Bombayo and the support of El Comite and the White Plains Puerto Rican Cultural Committee. So thank you very much. And see at the band, you didn't have an opportunity, so please go grab some food. There's arroz con gandules right here, and then there's more chicken there. This is still cooking. Thank you, everybody.